February 19th, 1945. It's 40 hours. The battleship USS Tennessee thunders as her 16-inch guns hurl shells into the black volcanic slopes of Iwo Jima.
Move out!
The horizon flickers with the orange light of bombardment.
Go! Get those trucks moving!
Ships firing in unison, the largest naval gun line the Pacific has yet seen. Overhead, carrier-based Hellcats wheel in lazy circles, their wings gleaming in the early sun. Every man in the assault force watches the island vanish beneath smoke, dust, and flame. Below deck, Petty Officer Second Class Sam Tex Callahan of the 133rd Naval Construction Battalion, a Seabee, sits on his pack helmet in his lap. He runs his thumb along the edge of his entrenching tool, listening to the bombardment. Around him, men sit in silence, sweating under their web gear, despite the morning chill. They're not infantry, they're builders, but every man knows the first waves on Iwo Jima won't distinguish between the two. A Marine sergeant passes by, shouting over the roar, "30 minutes, boys, then we hit the sand." Callahan exchanges a look with Chief Petty Officer Frank DeLeo, the battalion's foreman. "You ever see an island take that much shelling and still stand?" Chief DeLeo shakes his head. "Not one made of rock this black. That stuff eats bulldozers for breakfast." The ship lurches as another salvo goes out. By 0900, the first landing waves of the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions are away. Amphibious tractors crawl toward the shore through curtains of smoke and shrapnel. From a distance, Iwo Jima looks dead, but the illusion breaks the instant the Marines touch sand. Japanese guns buried deep in the volcanic rock open up in thunderous reply. Machine gun tracers cut through the haze. Mortars explode in geysers of black ash. Entire squads vanish between the dunes. On the deck of an LST offshore, Callahan grips the railing, watching the beach disappear into chaos. The radio squawks fragments of broken English and static, Red 2 pinned down. Need engineers, can't move the tracks. Beach 1 clogged with wrecks, tanks stuck, sands too soft. DeLeo barks. "That's our cue, boys. Grab your tools." The Seabees move to their LCMs, loading crates of fuel steel matting and Caterpillar D7 bulldozers. They're armed like infantry M1 carbines, sidearms, grenades, because on Iwo Jima, a wrench won't save your life. As the ramp drops, the smell hits them first, sulfur and cordite smoke and death. The air itself feels hot, the sand sucking at their boots like tar. Callahan hits the beach behind a group of Marines crouched behind a wrecked Sherman tank. Bullets hiss overhead, thudding into the metal hull. "Welcome to paradise," someone mutters. DeLeo yells, "Keep moving. We need to clear a lane for the dozers." They drag steel matting and explosives through the sand, hacking out the first rough road toward the high ground. Every few steps, another mortar lands, sending plumes of ash skyward. A bulldozer, freshly offloaded, lurches forward and immediately bogs down in the loose volcanic grit. The operator curses, gears grinding. "Not gonna dig through this stuff easy," Callahan says, shoveling at the front blade. "Feels like trying to move the earth itself, then move it." DeLeo grunts. Above them on Mount Suribachi, Japanese artillery observes through narrow embrasures carved into solid rock. The guns are pre-sighted invisible. Each time a group of Seabees clusters around a bulldozer or fuel drum, another shell lands with uncanny precision. The 28th Marines fight yard by yard toward the mountain's base. Their commander, Colonel Harry Liversedge, radios back to Fleet Command resistance far beyond expectation. Engineers needed at beachhead. Immediate. The message is relayed to the Seabees offshore. Within hours, the second wave of the 133rd Battalion comes in under cover of smoke. They unload more bulldozers, graders, and trucks straight into the killing zone. By nightfall, the Seabees and Marines are working shoulder to shoulder, fighting, digging, and dying in the same choking sand. The first night on Iwo Jima is a nightmare of noise. Machine guns chatter through the dark. The volcanic ash absorbs sound and light, so gunfire seems to come from everywhere at once. Flares drift overhead, painting the battlefield in ghostly blue-white. Callahan huddles beside his half-buried bulldozer rifle across his knees. Somewhere behind him, an engineer from another unit hums a tune, nervous, tuneless, the kind you hum just to prove you're still alive. A radio operator crawls by, whispering hoarsely. "We got orders. Airfield work starts tomorrow." Callahan blinks at him. "Tomorrow, we just landed." "Yeah," the operator says, crawling on. "Command wants a strip ready for fighters by the 24th. Callahan stares out into the dark, listening to the distant crack of small arms. 5 days, he murmurs. They want to land planes here in 5 days. February 20th dawns gray and windless. The smoke hasn't cleared it, never does. The island seems to breathe it. At 0600, the Seabees roll out their bulldozers again, now armored with makeshift steel plates, welded on overnight by Navy mechanics. They crawl forward blades pushing into the earth, while Marines cover them from the ridges. Every few yards, a shell lands close enough to shake bolts loose, but the machines keep moving. By noon, the outlines of Airfield No. 1 are visible 4,000 feet of blasted black earth, scraped flat between craters and corpses. The work is brutal, the heat suffocating. Each scoop of ash clings to the machinery, clogging filters, searing bare skin. Callahan works his dozer until the treads glow red. "Feels like we're paving hell," he says through his dust mask. DeLeo, directing from a bomb crater, yells back, "Then make it a runway, straight to heaven." Marine engineers join them, laying down pierced steel planking PSP sheets, each weighing 66 pounds. They interlock like armor plates, turning the treacherous sand into solid ground. Every clang of hammer on steel rings like artillery in the still air. Incredibly, by the third day, the first half-mile of runway is usable. A message goes out to Admiral Chester Nimitz aboard USS Eldorado preliminary strip operational, awaiting fighter detachment. That afternoon, as shells still burst along the ridge, the low rumble of engines grows from the east. A formation of P-51 Mustangs from Saipan sweeps overhead, dipping their wings in salute before circling back toward the smoke. The Seabees look up and cheer, a sound half fury, half exhaustion. For the first time, the air above Iwo Jima belongs to America. But the Japanese are far from beaten. From their tunnels under Mount Suribachi, they prepare a counterattack to destroy what the Seabees have built. As dusk falls, Callahan wipes sweat and ash from his face. "Chief," he says quietly, "we got a runway, but they ain't gonna let us keep it." DeLeo nods grimly. "Then we'll build it again, and again till they're all gone." Behind them, the bulldozers rumble through the night, pushing dirt, dragging steel, shaping history with every shovelful. The island burns. The men keep working. And by morning, the black sand of Iwo Jima, once a fortress, will begin to look like an airfield. February 21st, 1945. The engineers under fire. Dawn breaks red over the Pacific, the sun rising through a haze of smoke and dust that hangs like gauze over the island. The smell of sulfur is thicker now, mixed with the stench of burning oil, diesel, and death. The ground trembles intermittently, not from earthquakes, but from the endless pounding of naval guns. On the southern horizon, Mount Suribachi looms like a black fang, its slopes scored with shell holes and dotted with tiny flashes of gunfire. Inside its labyrinth of tunnels, Japanese artillery crews under Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi reload and fire, working in near darkness, guided by maps and memory. Every shell that lands on the beach below is pre-sighted. Each burst a grim calculation of geometry and hatred. On the beach, Seabee Sam Tex Callahan wakes in a shallow trench carved behind his bulldozer. His uniform is stiff with ash and seawater. He blinks against the acrid air wipes soot from his eyes and looks toward the half-finished runway that stretches inland. Even under bombardment, it looks unreal, a strip of raw steel and volcanic sand glinting in the morning light. Chief Frank DeLeo crouches beside him, a cigar stub clenched in his teeth. "They hit the east flank hard last night," he says, nodding toward the smoke curling up from the marine lines. "But the strip's still intact." "You boys did good." Callahan sits up, rolling his stiff shoulders. "Can't believe we're laying tarmac in the middle of hell." DeLeo smirks. "That's the job. We build. They break. We build again." At 0700, the Japanese open up again. Mortars rain down across the airfield site. The explosions come in patterns, first the center, then the flanks, forcing the Seabees to dive for cover. Bulldozers stall, trucks scatter. The sand fountains upward in black geysers. A marine radio operator near the shoreline shouts into his handset, "They've got our range. Get those dozers back." But DeLeo refuses to pull his crews out. "If we stop now," he yells, "the whole surface collapses. Keep those blades moving." Two bulldozers grind forward, their drivers crouched low behind improvised armor plates, salvaged boiler doors welded to the fronts. Callahan climbs onto his dozer engine, roaring beneath him, and pushes into the cratered section where the sand has caved in. Each foot forward feels like defying gravity itself. The volcanic ash behaves like quicksand, swallowing the heavy treads. The blade bites deep, shoving aside layers of grit mixed with shell fragments and blood. He keeps the throttle wide open until smoke pours from the exhaust. Above him, shrapnel hisses through the air like angry insects. One fragment tears through the fender beside his leg, spraying sparks. Almost there," he mutters, voice trembling but steady. When the smoke clears, a new section of the runway stands leveled. From the air, Navy reconnaissance aircraft orbiting offshore report back to Task Force 58 runway, visible progress steady, despite shelling. On the bridge of the USS El Dorado, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz listens to the report in silence. Around him, his staff watches the progress on the plotting board. "Those engineers," he says, "finally, they're fighting the island itself." His operations officer, Rear Admiral Harry Hill, nods. Kurabayashi's men are dug in deep. But the Seabees, they're cutting him out from under his feet. Nimitz stares at the map of Iwo Jima, the 3 airfields marked in red pencil. "Every foot of that runway is a life saved," he murmurs. "Keep the supply ships coming. Give them everything they need." By mid-afternoon, the airfield site is a madhouse of motion. Marines haul wounded past graders and trucks. Ammunition cooks off in the sun. Water trucks grind over craters still warm from mortar blasts. The smell of diesel mixes with hot metal. Callahan and his crew work through it all, faces blackened by soot. Each machine movement is a gamble. Sometimes the ground caves in, revealing a tunnel mouth or an unexploded shell. "Hey, Chief!" someone yells. "We've hit another bunker." DeLeo jogs over as the dozer backs away, revealing a hole exhaling smoke and heat. A burst of rifle fire erupts from within, snapping past his ear. "Back it up," DeLeo roars. He grabs a grenade from his belt, pulls the pin, and hurls it down the tunnel. The explosion sends a wave of dust across the site. When it settles, the hole is silent. "Seal it," DeLeo barks. Within minutes, the dozer is pushing rubble back over the crater. The war on Iwo Jima is measured in yards of dirt, and every yard costs lives. At 1,500-word spreads that Mount Suribachi is nearly surrounded. The 28th Marines are closing in from the south. The Seabees pause for a moment, watching the distant smoke rising from the slopes. Callahan wipes his hands on his filthy uniform. Think they'll take it, Dileo shrugs. Doesn't matter if they do or don't. We keep building. Nearby, a Marine corporal overhears and grins. Hell, Chief, if we take that hill, maybe you can put a landing pad up there, too. Dileo chuckles. Why not? Might be the only flat ground left. The brief laughter fades as another shell whistles in. Everyone hits the deck. That night, the Seabees dig in beside their machines. The ground is hot beneath their sleeping bags, the island's volcanic heart bleeding heat through the soil. The constant sound of naval gunfire echoes off the cliffs. Every few minutes, the mountain flashes white from another strike. Callahan lies awake, staring at the faint glow on the horizon. Somewhere out there, men are dying for the same strip of dirt he's leveling. He thinks of the B-29 crews flying from Tinian 11-hour missions over Japan, hundreds of bombers limping home on fumes. If they can land here someday, it'll all be worth it. He closes his eyes, the thought repeating like a prayer. Build fast. Build safe. Build home. February 23rd dawns clear and windless. The Seabees fire up their dozers at first light engines, coughing to life in the ash. From the south, a ripple of shouts carries across the battlefield. Men stop what they're doing, turning to look. On the summit of Mount Suribachi, a small flag rises, held by 6 Marines silhouetted against the morning sky. For a moment, the whole island seems to freeze. Callahan drops his shovel. Holy hell, he breathes. They did it. Dileo pulls off his helmet, eyes bright, despite the grime. Now we finish the damn airfield. The cheering fades. The work begins again. Bulldozers crawl forward. Trucks roll in with fuel and steel. The sound of hammers and engines drowns out the guns. By that night, the first full runway on Iwo Jima Airfield No. 1 is ready for its first test. Dawn creeps over Iwo Jima in sullen streaks of gray and orange. The sea is calm, but the island still shakes from distant bombardments. Even with Mount Suribachi secured, the northern ridges remain alive with Japanese artillery, hidden patient, lethal. At Airfield No. 1, the black sand glistens with dew and oil. Rows of Seabees work shoulder to shoulder with Marine engineers tightening bolts and laying the last sections of pierced steel planking. Each clang of the hammer echoes through the haze like the beat of a clock counting towards something historic. Chief Frank Dileo stalks the runway, clipboard in hand, boots grinding through the volcanic dust. Check the seams, he shouts. If one of those plates buckles, we'll be pulling bomber parts out of the zone. Sam Tex Callahan kneels beside a steel panel, driving a bolt into place with his wrench. His hands are blistered, his face hidden under a mask of grime. He doesn't speak much anymore. None of them do. The only language left is work. Nearby Navy trucks rumble in from the beach, hauling fuel drums and aluminum barrels. The smell of diesel and salt mixes with the metallic tang of blood still soaked into the soil. Marines walk the perimeter rifles at the ready eyes on the ridgelines. Because even now, even with the flag flying over Suribachi, the island is not safe. At 0730 hours, the first test run begins. A Marine pilot, Captain Walter Bud Williams, sits in the cockpit of an F-4U Corsair. The aircraft trembles with restrained power, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine idling rough in the thick air. He looks out across the crude runway, a ribbon of steel and ash stretching barely 4,000 feet. Airfield control, this is Able 1, he calls, requesting clearance for low-speed pass. From the command tent, DeLeo grabs the field phone. Able 1, this is ground. Runway clear. Give her hell, Captain. Williams grins under his oxygen mask. Roger that. Here goes nothing. He pushes the throttle forward. The Corsair surges ahead, tail lifting as it roars down the strip. The sound is deafening, shaking the dust off helmets and tent roofs. The fighter skims the surface wheels, barely touching before pulling up in a steep climb. The Seabees erupt into cheers. For the first time, they've seen their work fly. At 09:30, the impossible happens. A radio call comes in from the east B-29 inbound emergency landing. Engine out. Request immediate clearance. The voice crackles through static calm but strained a bomber crew on the edge of survival. Identify, the controller replies. This is Dynamite, serial 42-24784 9th Bomb Group, returning from Tokyo raid. Fuel critical. One engine gone, another overheating. DeLeo stares at the radio operator. Did he say B-29? Out here, the operator nods. They're 30 minutes out. Tell him we'll have the strip ready, DeLeo says, grabbing his helmet. Move everything, trucks, cranes, bulldozers, clear the runway. The next half hour is madness. Seabees and Marines drag equipment off the strip, hauling planking by hand, pushing vehicles into shell holes. Smoke still rises from the northern slopes, but no one notices. Every eye is on the sky. Callahan wipes his hands on his trousers, squinting toward the horizon. You think that thing can land here, Chief? She's as big as a house. She'll have to die, Leo says grimly, or she'll crash into the sea. At 1:02 hours, the first silver shape appears over the eastern horizon. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress, wounded and limping, drops through the low clouds, one propeller frozen. The other 3 engines cough black smoke. The radio crackles again. Iwo Jima control. This is Dynamite. We've got 30 minutes of fuel left. Gear won't lock down. Request emergency flare path. DeLeo snatches the field phone. Light it up, boys. Use everything we've got. Trucks, jeeps, even those damn fuel drums. Within minutes, Seabees line the edges of the runway with burning barrels, creating a flickering orange corridor through the haze. The smell of diesel fills the air. Callahan watches, heart pounding. She's coming in. At 10:14, the Superfortress crosses the shoreline, engines screaming in uneven rhythm. The plane wobbles low over the beach, clearing the debris by inches. Men dive for cover as it roars over their heads, wheels half extended. Too fast, someone mutters. He's too damn fast. The B-29 hits the steel runway with a shriek of tortured metal. Sparks spray in a brilliant white arc. One tire bursts. The plane skids sideways, veers into the soft sand at the runway's edge, and stops in a cloud of dust and smoke. Silence. Then a cheer rises from the entire island, a ragged, feral roar that rolls down the beach and out to the sea. The crew stumbles out, faces blackened, uniforms soaked in sweat. Their captain raises a trembling hand to the Seabees gathered around. You just saved 11 men, boys. Callahan grins, shaking his head. And we just landed a bomber on hell itself. That night, word spreads like wildfire through the fleet. The first B-29 has landed on Iwo Jima. The message reaches Admiral Nimitz aboard El Dorado and General Holland Smith ashore. Nimitz reads it twice, then turns to his operations officer. Get this to Washington. The Seabees have given us an unsinkable aircraft carrier. But even as the island celebrates, Kuribayashi's defenders regroup. In the northern sector, his gunners prepare counter-battery fire to destroy the airfield before dawn. The Japanese command refuses to accept the loss of Iwo Jima's first runway. In the darkness, shells begin to fall again, sporadic probing. Each blast sends shockwaves through the steel plating. DeLeo, lying in his foxhole, opens one eye and listens to the ground shake. They're not done yet, he mutters. Callahan beside him nods. Then neither are we. The next morning, the work resumes. The Seabees push further inland, beginning the layout for Airfield number 2 while maintaining the first. Marines secure the flanks, their rifles always pointed toward the caves that never stop breathing smoke. By the end of February, the first squadron of P-51 Mustangs touches down on the still smoking island, their tires leaving trails of ash. Iwo Jima has changed from a fortress into a base. Japan, watching from across the sea, realizes the unthinkable. America has built an airfield on a rock they thought could never be taken and done it in days. The volcano had tried to hold its ground. Now it was bleeding steel. The first bomber had landed. That miracle of steel and sweat should have meant safety. Instead, it painted a target. At dawn on February 25th, Iwo Jima shook again, not from the sea but from the north. The Japanese opened a relentless artillery barrage, their remaining guns hidden in the maze of tunnels near Motoyama Plateau. Each shell found its mark with uncanny precision, walking down the line of the newly built runway as if a vengeful god had sighted it himself. Chief Frank DeLeo dove for cover behind a wrecked fuel truck, shouting through the chaos. "Get the dozers off the strip! Move, move!" The sky filled with grit and shrapnel. Sam Tex Callahan hit the ground beside him, coughing through the volcanic dust. They're zeroed in on the PSP plates. "Chief, the reflections are giving us away." DeLeo squinted through the smoke. He could see the glint of torn steel planking twisting upward as another shell hit home, then dull it down. "Black paint tar, whatever you can find. We keep it operational or we lose everything." The Seabees scattered back into the storm, hauling tools and fuel drums as the bombardment intensified. The island groaned like something alive. By Iwo 800, the beach was a scrapyard. Half the bulldozers were wrecked, torn apart by direct hits. Yet amid the burning debris, the Seabees worked on repairing patching welding under fire. A crew dragged a new section of PSP planking toward a crater big enough to swallow a truck. Callahan climbed into the hole and shouted, "Toss it in, let's make it level again." He could feel the heat radiating from the earth beneath him. The volcanic soil was hot enough to scorch his palms through his gloves. Somewhere deep below, the island's ancient fire was still alive, feeding the sulfuric haze that hung over everything. Over the roar, Lieutenant Colonel Howard G. Kirchner, commanding officer of the 133rd Seabees, appeared at the edge of the crater. His face was streaked with grime, but his voice was steady. "You boys keep that runway open. I don't care how many times they hit it. We've got B-29s coming tonight, and they're not landing in the ocean." Callahan looked up. "Sir, we can barely keep the plates down." Kirchner pointed toward the sky. "Then nail them to hell itself." By midday, the bombardment shifted north, but snipers still fired from the ridgelines overlooking the airfield. Each crack of a rifle echoed across the black flats. Marines swept the perimeter in small squads, crawling from crater to crater, rooting out the hidden tunnels. A machine gun opened up from a crevice in the rock, pinning down a fuel convoy, trying to reach the strip. Callahan watched as a Marine flamethrower team crept forward, the operator hunching low with his tank clattering behind him. A burst of flame roared out, turning the cave mouth into a furnace. The gun fell silent. DeLeo exhaled slowly. Hell of a way to clear real estate. Callahan wiped sweat from his brow. This whole island's built on fire. We're just lighting what's already burning. That night, the sky glowed red from naval shells and burning oil. The Seabees worked by torchlight, cutting and welding. Sparks fell like shooting stars into the dust. The rhythmic pounding of hammers mixed with the distant crack of rifles. In a shallow trench beside the runway, Callahan and DeLeo sat over a can of cold rations. Neither man spoke for a long time. Finally, DeLeo said, "You ever think we'd be building airfields under enemy fire?" Callahan chuckled dryly. "I thought we built them after the fight. Not on this rock." DeLeo leaned back against his pack, looking toward Mount Suribachi, still glowing faintly in the night. "They said this island was useless, but you look around, planes, fuel supplies. It's gonna be the heart of the whole Pacific." Callahan took a sip from his canteen. Heart of hell, maybe. By February 26th, Airfield number 1 was fully operational again, crater-patched, painted dull gray, and guarded by Marines who slept with rifles across their laps. The Airfield command post sent a coded message to Admiral Nimitz's flagship Runway, repaired and functional, capable of receiving heavy bombers, continuing construction on Airfield number 2. That afternoon, the first formation of P-51 Mustangs from Saipan arrived skimming in low over the surf. Their silver wings flashed in the sun as they dropped onto the runway one after another, precise as clockwork. Dust billowed up behind each landing gear, and the roar of engines drowned out the artillery still echoing in the distance. Every man on the island stopped what he was doing. For a few seconds, Iwo Jima didn't sound like a battlefield, it sounded like an airbase. In Tokyo, Japanese intelligence received the first intercepted report that B-29s had landed on Iwo Jima. The news reached General Tadamichi Kuribayashi in his underground command center. He read the message silently, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to his staff. "So, they are landing already." His aide hesitated. "Shall we attempt to destroy the airfield?" General Kuribayashi shook his head. "We have already lost it. Our duty now is to make them bleed for every yard they hold." He closed his eyes briefly, hearing the distant thunder of bombs through the rock overhead. "If they can build a runway on this island, they can build one anywhere. Japan is no longer safe." Back on the island, the Seabees expanded their perimeter. Bulldozers and graders pushed northward, cutting through the jagged terrain toward Airfield number 2 near Motoyama village. Each foot of progress was contested. The Japanese defenders fought from beneath the earth mines, traps, ambushes, emerging from tunnels like ghosts. Callahan's dozer hit one of those mines late that afternoon. The explosion threw him clear, the world going white. When his hearing returned, he was lying in a crater, ears ringing, dirt raining down in slow motion. He looked up at DeLeo's face hovering above him. Still in one piece, Callahan spat blood and nodded. "Mostly. Good. 'Cause the next strip ain't gonna build itself." That night, they worked through the shell fire again. The runway lights flickered as repair crews patched another crater near the east end. The airfield looked like a stitched wound, rough, ugly, but healing. In the distance out over the Pacific, a low rumble began, deep, growing familiar. Callahan turned his head, eyes wide. From the dark horizon came the silhouettes of B-29 Superfortresses, dozens of them returning from a mission over Tokyo. Their running lights blinked faintly through the haze. The radio crackled, multiple bombers requesting emergency landing. Fuel exhausted. DeLeo stood watching the glowing dots approach. "All right, boys," he said softly. "Let's bring 'em home." The Seabees spread out along the runway, lighting flares, clearing debris, waving signal flags through the smoke. One by one, the giants touched down, battered smoking engines, sputtering but alive. By dawn, over a dozen B-29s sat lined up on Iwo Jima's black sand, gleaming silver against the ash. Callahan leaned on his shovel, watching them. "All this," he said quietly, "and it's only been a week." DeLeo nodded. "And we've already changed the war." February 28th. March 3, 1945. The Battle for the Northern Ridges. By the end of February, Iwo Jima was supposed to be secure. The planners back on Guam had marked it as mostly neutralized. But the island itself, that brutal breathing mass of ash and fire, had other ideas. The Marines were still fighting for every cave and ridge north of Motoyama. The Japanese garrison under Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had melted into the terrain, emerging from unseen tunnels to strike and vanish like ghosts. To the Seabees, it felt like the ground itself was fighting back. At Airfield number 2, the work never stopped. Bulldozers clawed into the volcanic soil as rifle fire crackled from the ridges. Mortar rounds fell like rain. And yet through the explosions, through the screams, the constant grinding hum of diesel engines never ceased. Chief Frank DeLeo stood atop a pile of crushed rock binoculars raised toward the north. "They're still in those caves near Hill 382, he muttered. "Damn near impossible to root 'em out." Beside him, Sam Tex Callahan spat into the dust. "We build, they blow it up, we build again. Feels like fighting a mountain." "That's exactly what it is," DeLeo replied. At Oro 9:30 on March 1st, a sudden explosion rocked the construction zone. A Japanese artillery shell slammed into the runway perimeter, flipping a fuel truck in a fireball. Men dove for cover as shrapnel whistled through the air. "Medic, we need a medic!" Callahan scrambled from behind his dozer, dragging a wounded Marine to safety. The man's leg was gone below the knee, but he was still conscious. "They're zeroing in again!" Callahan shouted over his shoulder. DeLeo crouched beside him, pressing a bandage against the wound. "We'll hold until the Navy hits him again." Offshore, the USS Tennessee and USS Nevada responded almost immediately. Their guns roared, sending 14-inch shells screaming over the island. The shock waves rolled through the black sand like thunder in the bones. When the dust settled, the Japanese guns were silent for now. In the afternoon, a group of reporters arrived with a Navy film unit. They had come to record the miracle of Iwo Jima, the airfields rising from ash, even as the battle raged. The cameramen waded through the mud lenses covered with dust. One of them pointed toward Callahan's dozer and shouted over the noise. "How long you been at this?" Callahan wiped sweat from his neck with a filthy sleeve. "Since D+1. Haven't stopped since." "What keeps you going?" the reporter asked. Callahan grinned, teeth white against his blackened face. "The next B-29 that don't have to ditch in the ocean. That's enough for me." The cameraman nodded silently, lowering the lens. There wasn't anything more to say. At 1600 hours, sirens blared air raid. The Seabees looked up to see a formation of A6M0s diving out of the cloud cover. The planes came in low, strafing the runway with machine gun fire. Tracers tore across the sand. "Take cover," someone yelled. Callahan hit the dirt as bullets chewed the PSP plates beside his head. A Mustang from the new fighter group at Airfield number 1 streaked in to intercept its 650 caliber Brownings flashing. A Zero burst into flames and cartwheeled into the surf. When it was over, 2 Seabees were dead, 3 wounded, and 1 bulldozer destroyed. But the runway remained intact. DeLeo climbed out from behind a sandbag wall, brushing ash off his uniform. "Hell of a day," he said. Callahan nodded. "And it ain't even dark yet." That night, the Marines pushed deeper into the northern plateau. The fighting around Hill 382, the so-called meat grinder, was some of the fiercest of the entire Pacific War. The sky pulsed with the light of artillery, the ground shaking like a living creature. In the glow of burning fuel dumps, the Seabees kept working. They filled craters, cleared wrecks, laid the foundation for Airfield number 3 further north. The Japanese counterattacks came without warning, small groups emerging from tunnels with grenades strapped to their chests, screaming defiance. Callahan saw one of them rush a bulldozer grenade raised. The driver gunned the throttle, hitting the man squarely, and sending him under the treads. The explosion ripped the dozer apart, killing the driver instantly. Callahan turned away, jaw tight. "No end to it," he muttered. DeLeo's voice came back flat. "Then we don't stop until they do." March 2nd. The morning brings a grim calm. Marines of the 3rd Division secure the central plateau and push toward the north tip. Naval guns thunder from offshore, hammering the last strongpoints. At Airfield number 1, B-29s land every few hours, damaged, low on fuel, limping in from raids over Japan. Some crews kiss the ground when they climb out. Others are too dazed to speak. The Seabees barely notice anymore. Each landing is a small miracle, but there's no time to celebrate. A new mission has arrived: expand the strip for B-29 takeoffs. DeLeo reads the order aloud at the morning briefing. They want it lengthened to 6,500 feet. That means cutting into the North Ridge. One man whistles. "That's solid rock, Chief." DeLeo nods. "Then bring the dynamite." By noon, the island echoes with the rhythmic blasts of Seabee demolition crews. Each explosion sends up a column of smoke that merges with the perpetual haze overhead. Bulldozers move in immediately, pushing debris aside, turning destruction into foundation. The Japanese fire sporadically from hidden positions, but their strength is fading. The defenders have no water, no resupply, and no air cover. Still, they fight snipers firing until they are buried under their own bunkers. A Marine sergeant passing by mutters, "They don't know how to quit." Callahan, hearing him, replies quietly, "Neither do we." March 3rd, dusk. The sun sets behind the fleet offshore, painting the horizon blood red. The airfield hums with life: bulldozers, idling cranes, moving fuel drums, repair crews welding under makeshift floodlights. From above, the island looks like a forge fire glowing in every direction, smoke rising from every ridge. The black sand glints faintly in the light, like the surface of some vast wounded heart still beating. As night falls, Callahan leans against his dozer, staring out toward the Pacific. The sound of engines carries across the water bombers heading west toward Japan. He can't see them, but he can feel them. Every vibration in the ground is a promise kept. Behind him, DeLeo lights a cigar, the ember glowing red in the dark. "We turned this volcano into a lifeline," he says. "Ain't that something?" Callahan nods, exhausted. "Yeah, Chief. Hell itself just became home base." March 4th, 1945. The wind off the Pacific is sharp and cold. Rain falls in thin, dirty sheets that turn the black sand into a syrup of ash and oil. The volcano breathes steam again, curling in ghostly plumes from fissures that split the island's flanks. On the western plain near Motoyama, bulldozers rumble in chorus. Floodlights glare through the haze, casting long shadows of men and machines. The Seabees are exhausted faces, hollow eyes red from dust and sleeplessness. But they keep moving, always forward. At the command post, Chief Frank DeLeo leans over a grease-stained map pinned to a crate. "This ridge here," he says, jabbing a finger at the contour lines, "that's what's left of Motoyama village. They want the next runway cut straight through it." Sam Tex Callahan, his clothes stiff with grime, squints at the map. "That's solid basalt, Chief. You'll wreck every blade and drill we've got." DeLeo nods. "Then we'll wreck 'em. We've got spares." Behind them, a demolition crew preps the charges. Satchel bags filled with TNT-shaped charges packed in powder cans, all jury-rigged to chew through volcanic stone. The air smells of ammonia diesel and wet ash. A Marine lieutenant walks past, shaking his head. "You boys are crazier than we are." Callahan grins. "Maybe. But when your planes start landing here, you'll thank us." At 1100 hours, the explosions begin. Each blast shakes the ground and sends shockwaves rolling across the airfield. Boulders tumble down the slope as the Seabees move in immediately behind the smoke bulldozers' roaring blades pushing the wreckage into shape. DeLeo stands atop a mound of rubble shouting through a megaphone. "Keep that blade level, push it east, don't stop till we hit sand." From the cliffs, the Japanese answer back with mortars. Each shell screams in from nowhere, exploding along the ridge. The Seabees duck, curse, then climb back onto their machines and keep working. By afternoon, the first 100 yards of Airfield number 2 are carved out of the rock, a jagged scar that already looks like a runway. Callahan's hands tremble from vibration as he throttles down his dozer. He's been driving since dawn. The metal under his seat burns through his coveralls. He wipes his face, leaving streaks of black mud. "How long you think before they stop shooting at us?" he asks. DeLeo glances up toward the northern ridges where the smoke still rises. "When we've built over every damn gun on this island." That night, rain turns to mist. The naval bombardment slows, replaced by the low hum of generators and the hammering of steel. Floodlights illuminate the airfield like a city under construction. Beneath that light, the Seabees build faster than ever. Trucks bring in drums of fuel crates of PSP planking and new caterpillars fresh off the LSTs. The machines sink into the mud, pull free, sink again. Men work knee-deep in muck, tying ropes around wheels, pulling with their bare hands. A Navy chaplain walks through the worksite, blessing the crews in passing. "You men are writing history," he says. Callahan smirks. "Feels more like we're digging it up." By dawn on March 5th, the first section of Airfield number 2 stretches 3,000 feet rough but usable. DeLeo surveys it from a Rise clipboard under his arm, eyes narrowed in pride and disbelief. "Get the survey crew," he orders. "Mark out the expansion to 5,000. We'll have Mustangs flying out of here before the week's out." Chief a Corporal says, pointing toward the east incoming bomber. The sound grows from a low hum to a deep, struggling drone. Through the gray haze, a lone B-29 Superfortress emerges, trailing smoke. "Another one out of Tokyo," Callahan mutters. The bomber dips low over the beach, 3 engines sputtering. The pilot's voice crackles over the radio, running on fumes. Gears jammed. "Request immediate clearance." DeLeo grabs the field mic. "Airfield 2 is green. Bring her in." The bomber comes in low, almost skimming the bulldozers. It hits hard, skips once, then settles, tires screeching against the half-finished runway. Dirt and sparks fly. The Seabees cheer as it slides to a stop in a cloud of dust. When the crew climbs out, one of them shouts over the din, "Didn't think this strip even existed." DeLeo grins. "Didn't yesterday." That afternoon, photographers from Stars and Stripes arrived to document the scene. B-29s lined up on fresh volcanic ash, Seabees welding next to smoking craters, Marines still fighting less than a mile away. The caption that will run later reads, "An airfield born under fire, built by men who would not wait for peace." Callahan doesn't notice the cameras. He's too busy repairing a snapped drive chain on his dozer. His knuckles bleed as he works the wrench. "You know," DeLeo says quietly, crouching beside him, "someday they'll say we built this place overnight." Callahan snorts. Then they weren't here for the nights. By March 6th, Airfield number 2 is fully operational for fighters. The first P-51 Mustangs of the 15th Fighter Group land in perfect formation, engines echoing across the blasted plain. They taxi past the Seabees, waving from open cockpits. For the first time since the landings, the Marines cheer openly. Even the exhausted bulldozer crews raise their helmets. One of the pilots shouts from his cockpit, "You boys just gave us a front porch to Japan." DeLeo laughs. "Tell your friends to use it. We built 2 more rooms already." That night, Callahan sits on an overturned crate at the edge of the runway, looking out at the bombers resting in rows. The moon hangs low, half hidden behind the haze. "You think they'll remember us?" he asks quietly. DeLeo looks over, lighting his cigar. "They'll remember the planes, the landings, maybe a few names. But that's all right." He exhales smoke into the wind. "Because we didn't come here for medals, Tex. We came here to make sure those boys had a place to land." "That's enough." Callahan nods. The hum of engines lulls across the night air, steady and soft, the heartbeat of a newborn airbase on a dead island. In the distance, the guns still rumble. But the planes keep coming one by one, drawn home by a strip of steel built on black sand. By the second week of March, Iwo Jima looked less like an island and more like a scar, a black wound carved out of the Pacific. From the air, the contrast was stark. To the south, the flag atop Mount Suribachi fluttered over the first airstrip. To the north, fire and smoke still boiled up from the ground. Between them stretched a network of craters, trenches, and fresh-cut runways, the living proof that the island had been claimed not by conquest alone but by construction. The Seabees of the 133rd Naval Construction Battalion and their Marine partners had turned volcanic hell into a functioning airbase, yet the cost climbed by the hour. Each yard of Airfield No. 2 brought them closer to the heart out of Kuribayashi's final defenses, the caves and tunnels of the northern plateau. At 0600 hours on March 7th, Chief Frank DeLeo stood on the crest of a newly graded ramp, goggles pushed up over his forehead. His voice rasped from exhaustion. "Tex," he said to Sam Callahan, "I want the north perimeter cleared by noon. Use whatever's left that runs. I don't care if it's half a dozer or a prayer." Callahan nodded, glancing toward the horizon where the ridges glowed faintly red. "Looks quiet this morning." "Don't believe it," DeLeo muttered. Moments later, the illusion of quiet shattered. Mortar shells rained down on the work site, bursting among the fuel drums. A column of flame erupted skyward, engulfing a truck and sending men diving into the dirt. "Cover!" DeLeo shouted as shrapnel whined overhead. The Japanese were firing from a camouflaged battery hidden in the slopes beyond the airfield. Even as naval guns offshore began to answer, the Seabees were already crawling back to their machines. "Get that blade moving," someone yelled. "We're not stopping now." The bulldozers roared to life, pushing through debris, defying the bombardment. By noon, the heat was unbearable. The volcanic soil radiated warmth like a stove, and every crater steamed as if the island itself were exhaling. Callahan climbed out of his dozer to clear a rock jammed in the blade. His gloves smoked when he touched the metal. "Feels like I'm digging into the devil's kitchen," he muttered. A Marine corporal passing by chuckled grimly. "Devil's kitchen, huh? Then you boys must be the cooks." Callahan smirked. "We serve hot steel 3 times a day." Behind them, another explosion ripped open the ground. A Seabee crew was blown backward, their machine shredded by shrapnel. Medics ran in, dragging the wounded to makeshift aid stations along the runway's edge. DeLeo knelt beside one of them, a young man with a shattered arm. "Hang in there, son," he said softly. "We're almost through this." The wounded man tried to smile. "Chief, don't let my dozer stop." "We won't," DeLeo promised. That evening, as dusk bled over the Pacific, the bombardment eased. From the northern ridge, Marines advanced under covering fire, flamethrowers clearing bunkers and tunnels. The night sky pulsed with the dull orange glow of burning fortifications. At the airfield, the Seabees used the lull to pour fuel into their machines, patch holes, and replace treads. A cargo ship offshore signaled with blinker lights. Supply convoy, approaching reinforcements and equipment. DeLeo exhaled in relief. Finally, more toys to break. Callahan wiped his face. Think they'll send us home after this, the chief gave a dry laugh. Home, kid, after this. They'll send us to build runways on the moon. March 8th dawn. The new supplies came ashore under constant sniper fire. Steel matting fuel rations and fresh bulldozers still smelling of paint. The Seabees worked in 3 shifts overlapping day and night. Some men hadn't slept more than an hour in days. Callahan's eyes burned as he guided his new D7 up a freshly blasted incline. Let's see what you can do, sweetheart, he muttered, throttling up. The blade bit into the ash, pushing it aside in clean arcs. Every few yards he'd spot pieces of twisted rebar or the remains of weapons relics of the Japanese airbase that once stood here before the Americans flattened it. From above, it looked as though 2 worlds had collided. The old Japanese runway shattered and cratered, and the new American one rising atop its bones. By nightfall, Airfield No. 2 stretched almost 6,000 feet. The Seabees were carving the final taxiways when the first formation of B-29s appeared overhead, silver ghosts glinting in the moonlight. They passed low, some trailing smoke, some limping on 2 engines. Each one carried stories from Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, long flights through flak and weather, ending here on this strip of black sand. At 2100 hours, radio chatter filled the command tent. Control, this is B-29 436064 Sky Queen. Requesting emergency landing. Losing pressure. 2 engines out. Roger, Sky Queen. Wind calm. Runway 2 cleared. The Seabees dropped their tools and ran to clear the strip. Torches and Jeep headlights flickered to life. The island hummed with anticipation. Through the smoke, the massive bomber descended, its fuselage scarred, its wings quivering. The wheels hit hard sparks flying from the steel planking. The aircraft skidded, slowed, and finally came to rest at the far end. The crew climbed out to cheers, one man kissing the black earth beneath his boots. Never thought I'd see this ugly rock and be glad about it, he said. DeLeo grinned. She ain't much to look at, but she's home for now. March 9th, the engineers reached the edge of the northern plateau. The Japanese fought to the last. The Marines' flamethrowers and demolitions turned tunnels into tombs. Kurabayashi's garrison, starving, wounded but unbroken, continued to resist in small, deadly bursts. For the Seabees, each explosion meant one thing: another delay, another patch to make. Callahan counted the days by the number of craters he filled. I've lost track of time, he told DeLeo. Feels like we've been building this island forever. DeLeo nodded. Maybe we have. Maybe that's what this place is, the whole war in one piece of rock. March 10th, 100. Rain again. The air smells of sulfur and oil, yet the island is changing. The drone of aircraft has replaced the roar of artillery. At Airfield No. 2, Mustangs and Corsairs take off at dawn to escort the B-29s heading north. Ground crews move like ants among the machines. The Seabees, filthy and half-starved, stand by their dozers watching the planes climb into the gray sky. A Marine colonel approaches DeLeo, salutes, and says, Chief Command wants to thank your battalion personally. You boys did the impossible. DeLeo looks at his men, mud-caked, hollow-eyed, still working. We just did what needed doing, sir. Callahan smiles faintly. Guess we built ourselves into the history books. The colonel nods. Yeah, and maybe into every bomber crew that makes it home alive. As the last Corsair lifts off the runway, its wheels throwing black sand into the air, DeLeo removes his helmet and wipes his brow. Let's start Airfield 3, he says simply. Callahan laughs, shaking his head. "You're insane, Chief." Maybe DeLeo replies, "But that's how we win wars, 1 yard of dirt at a time." The volcano rumbles faintly beneath their boots, but the sky above now belongs to them. March 11th, 1945. The rain had stopped, leaving the black sand gleaming like oil under the morning sun. Steam rose in ribbons from the still warm ground. The Seabees stood at the northern end of the island, staring at what the maps labeled Motoyama No. 3 Airfield, though to the men it was little more than a blasted plateau riddled with craters, caves, and death. Chief Frank DeLeo unrolled the blueprint across the hood of a half-buried truck. "All right, here's the plan," he said, stabbing a finger at the mud-streaked paper. "We cut through this ridge," he pointed to a jagged black escarpment ahead, level the plateau, and connect to the old Japanese strip. That gives us 7,000 feet of runway once it's paved. Sam Tex Callahan shook his head. "That ridge ain't dirt, Chief. It's pure lava rock." DeLeo grinned tiredly. "Then we'll teach it about progress." He looked up at the horizon where thin plumes of smoke rose from the last Japanese strongholds. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but construction couldn't wait for the shooting to stop. Every day mattered. By 0800, the Seabees had their bulldozers lined up like tanks' blades, gleaming exhaust plumes curling in the humid air. A demolition team moved ahead, placing charges in the ridge face. "Fire in the hole," someone yelled. The blast cracked across the island, echoing off the cliffs. Lava fragments rained down like black hail. As the dust cleared, DeLeo shouted, "Dozers forward!" Callahan's machine roared to life, treads grinding over loose rock. The blade bit deep, throwing sparks where steel met stone. The air filled with the shriek of tortured metal. From above, the scene looked unreal, a row of machines carving through volcanic cliffs, while artillery smoke still drifted in the distance. At 0945, snipers opened fire from a cave overlooking the worksite. The crack of rifles cut through the roar of engines. Bullets spanged off bulldozer blades. "Get down!" a Marine shouted, returning fire with his Garand. The Seabees dropped to the ground as machine gun tracers raked the ridge. "Where the hell are they?" DeLeo barked. A Marine sergeant pointed. "That cave halfway up the slope. They've got a perfect line on the graders." DeLeo's jaw clenched. "Fine. Let's take their view away." He motioned to the demolition team. "See that ridge face, blow it down." Minutes later, another explosion ripped the slope apart. The cliff face collapsed, burying the cave in tons of stone and dust. The gunfire stopped. Callahan climbed back onto his dozer and grinned through the grime. That's one way to close an account. By noon, progress was steady but brutal. The volcanic rock dulled every cutting edge, snapped drill bits, and stripped gear teeth. Men worked with blackened hands, eyes stinging from the fumes. Still, by the end of the day, the ridge began to fall, a jagged wall turning into a rough grade inch by inch. Trucks hauled the debris away to fill shell craters elsewhere on the island. The radio crackled with updates from the south. The Marines had finally breached the northern caves. Kuribayashi's forces were trapped, their communications cut. Yet no one on Iwo Jima dared speak of victory. Not yet. At sunset, DeLeo surveyed the scarred landscape. The orange light of the fires played across the steel planking and the silver fuselages of grounded bombers. The whole island shimmered like metal, a forge still hot from creation. March 12th. A new wave of supplies came ashore, crates of aviation fuel, steel rations, and mail. The Seabees gathered briefly as a petty officer handed out letters from home. Some read theirs silently. Others tucked them into breast pockets they'd long stopped buttoning. Callahan unfolded one, smiling faintly at his wife's handwriting. Keep your head down, Sam. The papers say you boys are building airstrips on a volcano. Don't be a fool and fall in. He folded it carefully, slid it back into his pocket, and climbed onto his dozer. Don't worry, darlin', he murmured. The volcano's tired. But Iwo Jima wasn't tired. It was waiting. At 1600 hours, a sudden tremor shook the ground, not an earthquake, but a Japanese counterattack. From tunnels less than 200 yards away, 100 soldiers erupted in a desperate charge, screaming, rifles flashing in the smoke. Hold the line, Marines shouted. Machine guns opened up, mowing them down in waves. The Seabees grabbed rifles and joined the fight, firing from behind bulldozers and stacks of steel planking. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes, but when it ended, 30 Japanese lay dead among the machines. DeLeo walked the line afterward, silent. That's the last gasp, he said finally. They're fighting because they've got nowhere left to go. Callahan looked toward the tunnels still smoldering with smoke. And we're fighting because we've got somewhere to build. March 13th. The morning began with clear skies, a rare gift. The sea shimmered turquoise, the air smelled faintly of cordite and salt. It would have been beautiful if not for the wreckage scattered across every slope. The third airfield was taking shape fast now. The Seabees worked 12-hour shifts, then 16. Nobody complained. They laid down miles of PSP-hammered rivets and graded taxiways while engineers erected control towers from scavenged steel beams. For the first time, someone painted a sign near the command post, Motoyama Field No. 3, built by the 133rd under fire. By afternoon, B-29s were landing on Airfield No. 1 every hour, not just for emergency landings now, but for refueling and rearming. The island had become a living artery, pumping life into the long bombing runs over Japan. Each time a Superfortress roared overhead, men paused to watch. The engine's deep hum was a sound of purpose, of something bigger than the mud and smoke around them. That night, as the last bulldozer shut down, Callahan and DeLeo sat on a stack of steel sheets, eating cold beans from a can. The stars above were faint through the haze. You know what gets me, Chief Callahan said quietly. They called us crazy for thinking we could build a runway here. And now we've built 3. DeLeo smiled. Crazy's just another word for the right man in the wrong place. Feels like the right place to me, Callahan replied. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the far-off rumble of distant bombing runs. Somewhere above, invisible in the night sky, another wave of B-29s was on its way to Tokyo, and soon some of them would come back here to land. The volcano had given everything it had, fire, ash, and fury, and still the Seabees built. By dawn, Motoyama No. 3 would stretch across the plateau, gleaming silver in the morning sun, carved by men who built faster than the enemy could destroy. And Japan, watching from across the sea, would finally understand. America could plant an airfield anywhere, even on the edge of hell. March 15, 1945. The morning began with a silence that felt almost wrong. No mortars, no snipers, no screaming shells, only the faint hiss of wind sweeping across the black plain. The battle for Iwo Jima was not over, but for the Seabees and Marines on Motoyama, it had entered a new phase. For the first time since the invasion, the island truly sounded like an airbase. The rhythmic growl of engines replaced gunfire. Jeeps rolled across taxiways. Mechanics shouted over the roar of idling Mustangs. At the northern plateau, Airfield No. 3 gleamed under the weak sunlight, 3 runways now stretching from sea to sea. Chief Frank DeLeo walked the flight line, hands behind his back boots, crunching over the steel matting. His face was dark with soot and sleeplessness, but there was pride in his eyes. He passed a crew of Seabees refueling a Corsair, another patching holes in PSP sheets, still dented by shrapnel. Everywhere men worked with quiet purpose, no heroics, no speeches, just the calm rhythm of progress. Beside a pile of sandbags, Sam Tex Callahan sat sharpening a wrench on a file. He looked up as a shadow crossed over him, a B-29 Superfortress, massive and silver, gliding down toward the runway. The bomber touched down, smooth tires screeching against the steel, and rolled to a stop just yards from where Callahan sat. He grinned, wiping sweat from his face. "Another one home," he muttered. DeLeo joined him, watching the crew climb down from the hatch. One of the bomber pilots, his flight suit streaked with oil, clapped the chief on the shoulder. "You boys are the best damn insurance policy in the Pacific." DeLeo chuckled. "You just keep bringing them back in one piece, son. We'll handle the ground." By March 16th, over 50 B-29s had landed safely on Iwo Jima, many limping in on one or two engines, their fuselages scarred from anti-aircraft fire. Some came in with flaps, locked others without landing gear. The Seabees cleared the runways after each touchdown, pulling wrecks off with dozers and laying fresh PSP in minutes. The airfield never closed. Not once. Each bomber that landed brought back proof of the island's worth, and the proof was written in the names of the saved crew after crew who would have otherwise ditched in the Pacific. The radio log at Airfield Command filled with entries: 0942 B-29. City of Wichita. 2 engines out. Landed safely. 11:17, gonna make it. Fuel exhausted, belly landing. Crew alive. 14:03, slick chick. Wounded aboard priority medical evac. Every entry was another dozen men who lived. Every tire mark on the runway was a story rescued from the ocean. Meanwhile, up north, the Marines were still fighting for the last pocket of resistance, a honeycomb of caves near Catano Point. The battle raged unseen beneath the rock, but its tremors reached the airfields. At 2300, the ground shook with distant detonations. The radio in DeLeo's command tent crackled, enemy tunnel complex collapsing. Multiple secondary explosions. Looks like they're burning their supplies. Callahan leaned against the tent pole, listening. Sounds like the island's dying. DeLeo nodded slowly. Good. Then maybe we can get some sleep before Tokyo hears us coming. March 17th. At sunrise, the first P-51 Mustang squadrons based permanently on Iwo Jima lifted off for escort duty. Their silver wings caught the morning light as they formed up in tight V formations, fuel tanks, gleaming propellers flashing gold. "Look at that," Callahan murmured, standing on the edge of the runway. "Like dragonflies out of hell." A Marine beside him grinned. "You built their nest." The Mustangs roared overhead, heading north straight toward Japan. It was the beginning of a new phase in the air war. Now the B-29s could launch from the Marianas, bomb Japan, and have fighter cover for the entire route home. The mission survival rate would soar. The strategic calculus of the Pacific had just tilted because of one strip of volcanic earth that men had bled to build. At fleet headquarters, aboard the USS El Dorado, Admiral Chester Nimitz read the latest report from Iwo Jima. Airfields 1, 2, and 3 operational. Over 400 bomber landings to date. Seabee construction ongoing despite enemy resistance. Casualties heavy but acceptable. Nimitz set the report down, his expression unreadable. "Acceptable," he murmured. "If only they knew what that word costs." His operations chief, Admiral Harry Hill, spoke quietly. "Without those runways, sir, we'd lose a bomber a day, maybe more." Nimitz nodded. "They built a bridge across the ocean, Harry, out of nothing but rock and will." That evening at Airfield No. 2, Callahan and DeLeo stood beside their machines as the sun dipped into the Pacific. The horizon glowed with the reflection of burning oil, the last fires from the northern battle. A jeep rattled past, headlights flickering. Chief, the driver called command, says the island's officially secure. DeLeo exhaled slowly. About damn time. Callahan laughed wearily. Does that mean we can rest? The chief grinned. You can rest when Airfield 3 has a control tower and a canteen. Callahan shook his head. You ever think about what happens after this, Chief, when we leave? DeLeo lit his cigar and watched a Mustang streak across the sky. We'll leave behind a piece of America right here. And every time one of those bombers makes it home, that's our flag still flying. March 18th. Dawn again. The black sand gleamed silver under the rising sun. The island was quiet, too quiet for a place that had been alive with death only weeks before. The Seabees lined up their bulldozers in neat rows, engines idling. A Navy photographer climbed onto a truck to take a panoramic shot, the volcano smoking faintly in the distance, the 3 airfields stretching like scars across the island, and the men, filthy, unshaven, unbowed, standing beside their machines. When the shutter clicked, it caught more than a photo. It captured a miracle. Behind every streak of dust, every steel plate, every crater filled, was the story of men who had built faster than the enemy could destroy, men who had turned fire into foundation. And in the weeks to come, more than 2,400 crippled bombers would land here, saving the lives of nearly 25,000 airmen. But that morning, none of them knew the numbers. They only knew the sound of engines above and the heat of the ground beneath their boots. Callahan turned to DeLeo, voice low. Chief, we really did it. DeLeo looked out toward the Pacific and nodded. Yeah, Tex. We built an airfield on the edge of the world. The volcano rumbled once faintly like a final salute. And above it, America's planes roared home. The rain came back hard. By March 19th, the island was a soup of black mud and diesel, the air thick with mist. But for the first time since the invasion, the thunder wasn't from shells. It was the rumble of departing planes, an endless procession of Mustangs and Superfortresses clawing their way north into the cloud ceiling. Iwo Jima was alive, and that life had come at a cost. At the edge of Airfield number 1, a row of wooden crosses leaned slightly in the wind. Seabees and Marines buried side by side. Helmets hung from the posts, dog tags clinking in the breeze. The ground between them still steamed faintly warm from the island's volcanic core. Chief Frank DeLeo stood there that morning with his cap in his hand. His uniform was torn, streaked with oil and grime. He didn't say anything for a long time. Beside him, Sam Tex Callahan lowered a small tin cross into the dirt. It wasn't standard issue, he'd bent it himself from scrap metal taken off a wrecked bulldozer. The tag on it read PO2, Charles Red Larkin, 133rd NCB. Red was only 20, Callahan said quietly. Got hit fixing a clutch. DeLeo nodded, jaw tight. He built this place, Tex. He's part of it now. The chief lit a cigarette, smoke curling in the damp air. Every inch of these runways cost a man like him. Don't you forget that. I won't, Callahan said. The same morning, Admiral Chester Nimitz sent a message across the Pacific to the Joint Chiefs in Washington. Our airfields on Iwo Jima are fully operational. Enemy resistance contained. Island secured. Strategic value immeasurable. In his personal log, he added a single line that history would later quote. Among the Americans serving on Iwo Island, uncommon valor was a common virtue. That sentence would be carved into memorials printed in textbooks, read by generations who would never feel the heat of volcanic sand or the shock of artillery underfoot. But for DeLeo and his men, valor wasn't an idea. It was the sound of an engine starting again After being hit, the clang of shovels filling craters, the laughter in the dark between bombardments. March 20th. A supply convoy arrived under overcast skies. Crates of rations, fuel, and mail came ashore, ferried by amphibious DUKWs grinding through the surf. The men gathered around for letters from home, each envelope smeared with salt. Callahan opened a photo of his wife holding their baby daughter born 6 months earlier. He smiled faintly, thumbing the edge. "Chief," he said, "you ever think about what you'll do when this is over?" DeLeo was tightening a bolt on a bulldozer track. "Sleep for a week, eat something that ain't cold beans, and maybe build something that don't blow up." He looked over at Callahan. "You same," Callahan said. "Maybe teach my girl how to build something, too." DeLeo grinned. "Start her on something small, maybe not a runway." They both laughed, the sound strange in the fog. By March 21st, Airfield number 3 had reached its full 7,000-foot length. Engineers finished laying the last PSP section, while Marines patrolled the surrounding cliffs. The Japanese were gone now, or buried beneath the ground they'd sworn to defend. The island was quiet, save for the hum of engines and the metallic ring of hammers. At midday, a formation of B-29s from the 20th Air Force came in for refueling, 17 in total. They landed one by one, rolling past the Seabees, who waved from the sidelines. The lead pilot climbed out and saluted DeLeo. "Heard you boys built this strip under fire," he said. DeLeo nodded. "Under fire, under rain, under damn near everything." The pilot looked back at his bomber, its fuselage scarred from flak. "You gave us a place to live when the ocean tried to take us. I'll never forget that." That night in the mess tent, someone rigged a phonograph to a generator. Music, faint, scratchy, filled the air for the first time in weeks. Callahan leaned back on a crate, eyes half closed. "Ain't that something? Sounds like civilization." DeLeo sipped his coffee. "Civilization's what we build when the shooting stops. Guess that means we're halfway there." A young Seabee nearby raised his tin cup. "To the 133rd, to the crazy bastards who paved a volcano." The tent erupted in laughter and cheers. For a few minutes, the war felt far away. March 22nd brought the first official inspection. Navy brass arrived by plane, crisp uniforms, polished boots, cameras flashing. They shook hands, gave speeches about courage and ingenuity. DeLeo stood at the edge of the runway, arms crossed, while reporters took photos of Airfield number 2. Callahan muttered, "Guess they're gonna make us famous." "Good," DeLeo said with a grin. "Maybe next time they'll send better coffee." One of the officers approached them, clipboard in hand. "Chief DeLeo Washington wants to know how soon these airfields can handle full B-29 operations." "They already do," DeLeo replied. "Been doing it for a week." The officer blinked. "Under whose authorization?" DeLeo smirked. "Under gravity's. You land or you don't." By March 23rd, the last pocket of Japanese resistance was gone. The island that had cost 26,000 American casualties, 800 dead, finally went silent. The Seabees gathered at dusk, watching the sunset over the Pacific. The sky was clear for the first time in a month, the horizon a clean line of gold. Callahan took off his helmet, rubbing at the scar across his cheek. "Never thought I'd see the day it was quiet." DeLeo nodded. "Quiet don't mean peace, Tex. But it's the start." They stood in silence as the waves lapped the shore. Behind them, the runways stretched in silver lines reflecting the fading sun. Tomorrow, more bombers would come. More lives would be saved. But tonight, for the first time since February 19th, the men of the 133rd could breathe. They had built a miracle from ruin and paid for every inch with blood, sweat, and stubbornness. As darkness fell, the volcano whispered softly beneath the earth, as if even Iwo Jima itself was finally at rest. March 24th. At dawn, the island's 3 runways glistened under a fresh rain. From above, Iwo Jima no longer looked like a battlefield, it looked like a machine. 3 metallic veins stretched across the volcanic rock, gleaming with the morning light. And across those veins, lifeblood moved men, machines, and planes, linking the Marianas to the Japanese mainland, in a rhythm so steady it seemed mechanical. Every hour, the roar began again. B-29 Superfortresses droned in from the east, their massive wings cutting through the mist, bellies scarred and oil-streaked from Tokyo raids. Fighters launched north to meet them, Mustangs and Thunderbolts sweeping low over the water. The whole island moved to that sound engine's warming tires, screeching cranes groaning as they hauled wrecks aside. At Airfield No. 2, Chief Frank DeLeo leaned against a fuel drum, watching a new formation of bombers land. "Never seen so many birds in one place," he said, voice low. Beside him, Sam Tex Callahan nodded, eyes fixed on the sky. "And every one of 'em's alive because of what we built." They stood in silence as another B-29 approached, one engine feathered, another trailing smoke. Its landing was rough wheels skidding across the PSP plates, but it stayed upright. The crew tumbled out, some limping, one carried. Their commander, barely 23, grabbed DeLeo's hand and said, "We wouldn't have made it without you." DeLeo just nodded. "We know, son. That's why we're here." By now, the Seabees had lost count of how many landings they'd watched. Over 2,000 Superfortresses had touched down on Iwo Jima since the first emergency landing on February 24th. Every single one was a life saved, a story reclaimed from the ocean's grave. At night, the airfield shimmered with the glow of taxi lights and flares. The ground crews moved like clockwork, refueling, patching, loading supplies. Overhead, the bombers thundered out toward Japan in endless streams, the reflection of their silver bellies flashing across the waves. The men on the island didn't sleep much anymore. They'd grown used to the sound, used to the endless rhythm of engines and wind. Sometimes Callahan would look up from his work and realize he couldn't tell if it was day or night. The sky was always gray, the light always hazed by smoke. "You ever think about what it's going to look like when this is over?" he asked once. DeLeo grinned. "Flat, straight, paved, like everything we've ever built." Callahan laughed. "Hell, Chief, maybe we'll go home and build highways. Won't even need to dodge bullets." March 26th. The battle for Iwo Jima officially ended that morning. The last organized Japanese resistance collapsed after a suicidal banzai charge near Kitano Point. Over 21,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead. Fewer than 300 were taken prisoner. But even as the word "secured" echoed through the command radios, the Seabees didn't stop. They were already expanding storage depots, digging fuel lines, and constructing revetments for fighters. At noon, an Army photographer arrived to document the transformation. His camera whirred as he captured a panorama: 3 airfields, a web of fuel pipelines, stacks of ordnance, and men moving through the heat haze like ants. When he asked for a statement, DeLeo simply said, "We built what they said couldn't be built. That's all." The reporter smiled. "You realize you've changed the whole war?" Chief DeLeo shrugged. "We didn't change it. We just gave it a runway." By March 28th, the pattern was unbreakable. Morning flights out, afternoon landings in, night repairs and rest that never really happened. But exhaustion didn't matter anymore. They could see the difference. Each bomber that came in carried a new set of faces, tired, thankful, alive. And each time those men shook hands with the Seabees, traded cigarettes, shared stories. The friendship between aircrew and builder became something sacred, unspoken. Once, after helping pull a damaged B-29 clear of the runway, a pilot handed Callahan his squadron patch, a winged skull embroidered and frayed. "Keep it," the man said. "You earned your own wings out here." Callahan pinned it inside his cap and wore it until the day he shipped home, March 30th. The volcanic island had become a city of motion. The Navy built a pier long enough to unload entire convoys. Army engineers connected the airfields with roads, signal lines, and radar stations. Marine MPs directed traffic between the runways, while ambulances ferried the wounded to new field hospitals built by the same men who once dug craters here for cover. And all the while, the Seabees built hangars, workshops, mess halls, even a chapel, fashioned from scrap steel and driftwood. Inside that chapel, on March 31st, a memorial service was held for the fallen of the 133rd. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls, carrying the sound of aircraft engines from outside. The chaplain's voice trembled as he read the names. 47 from the 133rd. Over 200 Seabees total across all battalions. Callahan sat in the front row, cap in hand. DeLeo stood behind him, arms folded, eyes on the cross built from welded PSP strips. When the prayer ended, no one spoke. They simply looked out the open doorway at the sky filled with planes. Each bomber that lifted off was a tribute more lasting than marble. As dusk fell, DeLeo walked the edge of the third runway. The heat from the ground rose through his boots. The air smelled of oil cordite and salt. Callahan joined him, hands in his pockets. "You think we'll ever come back here?" Chief DeLeo shook his head. "If we do, it'll be to fly in, not dig in." Callahan looked toward the horizon where the Pacific met the sky. "Kinda strange, ain't it? This little rock halfway between everything, and now it decides who makes it home." "Yeah," DeLeo said quietly. "We made it that way." The wind shifted, carrying the low hum of departing bombers, dozens of them, climbing in formation toward the north. The sky glowed faintly from the east, reflecting the fires still burning in Japan. Between those two worlds, Iwo Jima pulsed with life, a bridge of steel and sacrifice. The men of the 133rd stood on that bridge and watched the sky, knowing what their work meant now. The war was still raging, but the tide had turned, and their runways were the proof. April 2nd, 1945. Dawn spilled over Iwo Jima in streaks of rose and gray, washing the black sand in light. The guns had fallen silent weeks ago, yet the island was anything but still. The runways roared from sunrise to sundown, the air alive with the thunder of engines. Every morning the B-29s came home. Not one or two, but squadrons limping back from Tokyo, Nagoya, Kobe. Silver giants with shredded wings burned fuselages and fuel tanks bone dry. They came in on prayer and fumes, sometimes missing whole engines, sometimes missing parts of crews. And every time the Seabees were waiting, flare lines lit bulldozers, ready medics standing by. Chief Frank DeLeo and Sam Tex Callahan had stopped counting the landings weeks ago. What mattered now wasn't the numbers, it was the faces. That morning, a battered Superfortress named the Old Goat came over the horizon, listing heavily. The crew called ahead, lost 2 engines. Hydraulics gone, flaps frozen. "We'll try one pass." "Roger that," Old Goat DeLeo replied through the radio, his voice steady. "You've got a mile of steel waiting. Bring her home." The plane came in crooked smoke trailing from both wings. It hit hard, too hard, the tires burst, the landing gear collapsed. Sparks flew as the fuselage scraped down the strip, showering molten steel. When it finally stopped, the men on the ground sprinted toward it. The crew spilled out, coughing, bleeding alive. The pilot looked around the smoldering wreck and whispered, "Didn't think there was any place left to land." DeLeo clapped him on the shoulder. "There is now sun. You're standing on it." By mid-April, the numbers were staggering. More than 1,400 bombers had landed safely. Over 15,000 airmen were alive because of it. And the island, once a symbol of desolation, had become the beating heart of the air war against Japan. Each day followed the same rhythm: fuel, fix, fly, repeat. The Seabees and mechanics worked around the clock. They could patch a runway crater in under an hour, change a B-29 tire in 20 minutes, rebuild an engine mount overnight. Even the Marines who had fought through hell now worked beside them, guarding the airfields, hauling supplies, sharing cigarettes and silence. The line between soldier and builder had blurred into something new, something that belonged only to Iwo Jima. One night a typhoon rolled in from the west. Sheets of rain lashed the island, turning the ash to sludge. Wind screamed through the fuel drums, tearing at tents. Callahan fought to anchor the tarps covering the bulldozers. "If we lose the planking," he shouted, "half the runway's gone." DeLeo was already knee-deep in water, hammering down steel sheets with a sledge. "Then we don't lose it." For 12 straight hours, they fought the storm as they'd fought the enemy, digging, tying welding through wind and darkness. When dawn broke, the storm was gone and the runway was still there, scarred, battered, but whole. Callahan slumped beside his dozer, soaked to the bone. "You know," he said, "if this island don't kill us, it's gonna make us legends." DeLeo grinned, water dripping from his helmet. "Hell, Tex. Legends don't get this muddy." By May, the war had shifted north. Okinawa burned now. The headlines had moved on. But for the crews flying from Saipan and Guam, Iwo Jima remained the single point between life and oblivion. 1 out of every 4 returning bombers landed there at least once. And every time they did, a Seabee was there to wave them in grease-stained and sunburned, standing on ground that still trembled with heat from the volcano below. In Washington, maps of the Pacific now had a red circle around a speck labeled Iwo Jima Emergency Air Base. Strategists pointed at it when talking about shortened flight times, improved crew survival rates, escort coverage. But those words, fuel ratios, sortie counts, tonnage delivered, meant little to the men who lived it. To them, Iwo Jima wasn't a red circle. It was sweat and smoke and the endless ring of steel on stone. May 9th, 1945. Victory in Europe. The news came across the radios mixed with static and disbelief. The Seabees paused just long enough to listen. Someone yelled, "Berlin's down, the Krauts quit," and a cheer rippled through the ranks. Callahan smiled, but it was a quiet smile. "Europe's done," he said softly. "Now it's just us." DeLeo nodded. "And we'll finish it. Right here." He looked toward the north, where another B-29 was circling in the haze, trying to line up for a landing. "Get the flares ready," he said. "They'll be here any minute." Because even on the day Europe's war ended, the Pacific didn't stop. The planes kept coming, the runways stayed alive, and the island kept working. Weeks later, when the official numbers came in, the Navy made the announcement: from March to August 1945, 251 B-29s made emergency landings on Iwo Jima. Over 24,000 American airmen saved. Those were the figures history would remember. But for the Seabees of the 133rd, memory was something else: at the faces of the men they'd pulled from wrecks. The smell of burned oil, the sound of engines fading into silence. On his final day on the island, Callahan stood on the edge of Airfield No. 3 as a line of bombers taxied past. He rested his hand on the hot steel plating. "Never thought I'd say this," he murmured, "but I'm gonna miss this damned rock." DeLeo joined him, carrying his helmet under one arm. "You earned that right, Tex. We all did." He looked around at what they had made, 3 airfields carved out of fire, still steaming in the heat. "You know what's funny?" he said. "We came here to build runways. Turns out we built a monument." That night, as the last flight of Mustangs lifted off toward the horizon, the island went quiet again. The sea whispered against the black shore. The volcano's breath rose in thin white plumes, and above it all the stars shone cold, clear, eternal. Iwo Jima would never be green again. It would never be beautiful. But it had become something far greater, a place where men turned destruction into salvation, where the builders built faster than death, where a runway became a promise, where every yard of black sand held the weight of valor, and where America proved once and for all that even on the edge of hell it could build hope out of ash.